Well, the Skakel murder case has been in the news for years. We've covered it on this program for time after time here, and it is back in the headlines again. Michael Skakel's cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has a new book, and the book makes a case that Skakel is in fact innocent. I want to review some of the facts of the case. Skakel found guilty in 2002 of killing his neighbor Martha Moxley in Greenwich, this back in 1975. At the time, both were 15. Skakel, he was in prison for 11 years. That until the Connecticut Superior Court threw out the conviction in 2013. That judge said Skakel did not get an adequate defense. Now, the state Supreme Court is weighing whether to reinstate that conviction. RFK Jr.'s book is called Framed: Why Michael Skakel Spent Over a Decade in Prison for a Murder He Didn't Commit. I spoke with Kennedy about the book, and he explained why he's convinced that his cousin, Michael Skakel, did not do it.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of corroborative evidence in this book that has never been seen by anybody before. Second of all, this case has never been, these witnesses and these killers have never been investigated by the police. In fact, one of them lives a few blocks from the police station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, from Detective Frank Garr's office. And Detective Garr is the person who just pursued Michael Skakel single-mindedly and put him in jail again, and engineered by suborning perjury, which I show in the book, a case against Michael Skakel. Those same detectives do not want to look at alternative theory of this case, and this is not a theory. These are the people who killed Martha Moxley. I've spoken to them, I've tape recorded them, they've made inculpatory decisions, they've admitted that they were in Greenwich that night, they admitted that they stayed in the house of an 11-year-old boy where Tony Bryan says they cleaned the blood off themselves, and that boy said the same thing. No court has ever looked at this evidence because the two men involved took the Fifth Amendment when they were subpoenaed. So nobody's ever questioned them except for me, and I have those tape recordings. And then, of course, the principal witness, Tony Bryant. Any of your listeners can go onto YouTube and look at his confession on YouTube and see if they think he's credible or not. A judge Judge Karazin actually found that his testimony was credible enough to be entered as evidence. Judge Karazin then opined that he didn't think that it would influence a jury, but he has no better capacity to make that determination than any layman. And I think I would wager to you that it would be impossible for anybody to read my book and think that that story will not influence a jury. The evidence against these people, including the two hairs that were found on Martha Moxley's body, which are consistent with the physical descriptions of these two men and inconsistent with any Skakel hair or anybody else who's ever been connected to this. These two men one of them was African American, one of the hairs was Negroid, and nobody's ever been able to explain that. And the other had what the FBI crime lab called Asian characteristics, and the other man is described as Caucasian with Asian characteristics or American Indian characteristics. Those are the only two pieces of physical evidence that were ever found on Martha Moxley's body, and they're absolutely consistent with Tony Bryan's description of these two men, that they came up with him that night, that they had been to Greenwich on 6 different occasions. They had met Martha Moxley. One of them, Adolph Hasbrook, had become obsessed with her, that they plotted the murder on the way up that night. They confessed to the murder on many, many occasions thereafter, and that the 11-year-old boy in whose home they cleaned up also corroborated their confessions and said that indeed they had stayed the night and cleaned off the blood in his house. So, and there's lots and lots of corroborative evidence. Again, it's outlined in the book, and I don't think that that people who read the book will have any question that these two gentlemen killed Martha Moxley.
Well, why wouldn't his own attorney have pointed the finger at these two then teenagers from the Bronx instead of his own sibling? Explain that to me, why you guys have such different, and if you both believe that Michael's innocent, you have two different complete theories as to who did it.
Well, I think if you're talking about Michael Skakel's attorney,
yes,
Hubie Santos, well, Hubie Santos has made that statement in court. He surprised Michael Skakel and surprised me. I think he's wrong about that. I think that statement was a strategic statement by him, and I think that people who are familiar with the case can understand why he may have thought that that statement would be important for him to say in front of the judges. The fact is that Tommy Skakel did not and could not also have committed this crime, as the prosecutor himself argued to the jury. Tommy Skakel had only a 15-minute window in which to kill Martha Moxley, conceal the body, clean up the blood, and then reappear to watch the French Connection that evening. Martha Moxley was killed at 10 o'clock that night. Tommy Skakel was 15 minutes later watching the French Connection with the other principal suspect, who was the suspect for 15 years, Kenny Littleton, who had a deep and profound incentive to inculpate Tommy Skakel.
You know the response to the publication of your book from the Connecticut Division of Criminal Justice. They released a statement which in part said, the book presented no valid or new information, and they call your claims inflammatory. And they also said that the allegations against the two teenage suspects that you described were, quote unquote, thoroughly vetted in legal proceedings and found to be baseless. They're also saying, Robert, that the timing of this book is intended to influence potential proceedings going forward and whether or not there'll be a retrial, that you're trying to, in effect, create an influencer here to say, we've got all these theories. If you try and take this to trial again, this is what you can expect.
Let me answer your first question. You quote the Division of Criminal Justice saying that my book is baseless. The Division of Criminal Justice issued that proclamation before my book was published or before anybody had read the book. So they didn't know what's in the book. They have not read the book. They have never investigated the two murderers. And of course, the overarching theme of the book is the single-minded determination of that division to look at no evidence, to dismiss evidence, to conceal evidence, to suborn perjury in a single-minded endeavor to get Michael Skakel convicted, to the exclusion of evidence, abundant evidence against many, many other culprits and suspects, and to altogether ignore the two guys who have made confessions to this crime, multiple confessions to the crime, who admit that they were there that night, admit that they stayed in the home of the 11-year-old boy who said that they cleaned off the blood in his presence, and who are the only people where physical evidence found on Martha Moxley's body was consistent with their physical descriptions. So the state of Connecticut has never investigated them. No police officer has ever talked to them. What the prosecutor will tell you is, well, those two gentlemen have taken the Fifth Amendment and that they won't talk anymore. Well, the answer to that, which you should bring up to them when you discuss it, is that the state of Connecticut has the power to grant immunity in this case, and it can easily grant immunity to either, if it really believes that those two men are innocent, of course it should grant immunity. If it believes that, even if it doesn't believe that they're innocent, it believes they might have had something to do with the murder, they can still grant immunity to Tony Bryan and compel him to speak. So the state is saying that this has been vetted, and yet the state has never talked to any witness or any of the suspects in this case, and that's what they really need to do.
Again, the book is Framed: Why Michael Skakel Spent Over a Decade in Prison for a Murder He Didn't Commit. Robert Kennedy, Jr., thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll bring our legal panel in to discuss the Skakel case, as well as the assertions made by RFK Jr.